Good morning. My name is Niva Elkin-Koren. I'm the Dean of the Faculty of Law here at the University of Haifa. It's a pleasure for me to open the second day of our 2 days conference on electronic books. Yesterday we held the first day of this conference discussing the changing nature of books, the changing nature of publishing books, the need for publishers and libraries to redefine or maybe reinvent their role in the emerging landscape of digital distribution. Today we're going to talk about some of the policy implications and focus on some of the legal challenges that this environment is raising. This conference is co-organized by the Haifa Center for Law and Technology here at the Faculty of Law, together with the Sagi Center for Internet Research. The director of that center will join us later today. And in collaboration with the National Library of Israel and our collaboration with the National Library of Israel has been more intensive in the past 2 years, where the National Library of Israel undertook the digitization initiative with the vision of digitizing its collection and making it available to the public. Our IP clinic, intellectual property clinic at the Faculty of Law, is working together with the National Library to face some of the legal challenges and try to provide some solutions and strategies for addressing some of the legal difficulties that are faced by the National Library. We're going to discuss in our first session today some of the impediments on digital access, and I'm sure we're going to hear more about that. I'd like to thank the co-organizers of this conference for their partnership, and also to thank my my academic co-organizers, Dalit Kendo and Rachel Aridor Hershkovitz, two of our PhD students who work on digital access, and Professor Shazaf Rafaeli for putting together this program that we had for the past 2 days. As I said yesterday, we talked about the changing nature of books, and today we're going to talk about policy and legal implications and a kind of a bridge between yesterday and today. And for those of you who couldn't attend our sessions yesterday and would like to get a taste of what it was like or what type of issues were discussed, we invited Professor Panya Ozz-Zaltzberger, a historian at our Faculty of Law, that has been looking into some of these issues and will talk to us this morning as an opening. We'll provide some opening remarks on the history of books. So please, Panya, please join us.
Thank you very much, Niva. Good morning, everyone. I hope you can all hear me. My title is Tablet to Tablet, Scroll to Scroll. Sounds a little like ashes to ashes, dust to dust when it comes to the codex, but hopefully not yet. I will begin by very quickly defining for you the whole meaning and history of the book. It will take me 2 minutes, and then I'll talk another 18. My definition of the book, and there are many all over the place, so just pick your choice, is a cohesively meaningful long read storable on a single container. I hope I don't have to repeat that. Mind that I say long read rather than long text, because not every long shopping list can be a book. It has to be meaningful. That is not a tale told by an idiot signifying nothing. It has to be cohesive, therefore it cannot be Craigslist. But that's more or less the definition: a cohesively meaningful long read storable on a single container. Thank you. How is that? Any better? Now, let's talk about the container. I'll say a few things about the contents towards the very end, but the container is very, very interesting. We have, if you like, low-tech and electronic reader containers for books today, but low-tech I find quite insulting, so let's call it mechanical. And mechanical is the whole group from the tablet made of stone or wood. We only have stone tablets remaining, hardly any, a few wooden tablets remaining. Then the scroll, which could be made of papyrus or parchment or paper in modern times. And then comes the codex that can be made of parchment or paper. Only the paper codex can enable Gutenberg to print. And then we have the printed paper codex, and till comes the digital or the electronic paper, ink, and book. People around us say books will soon disappear, when they actually mean very soon you will no longer see people in train stations holding dog-eared paperbacks in front of their noses. Now what happens is that it keeps slipping down. Either mechanical or electronic, but it is slipping down. So the vast majority of people, when hearing the word book, still imagine a codex, not a Kindle. What is a codex? By codex we mean a covered, stitched and bound collection of cut and identically sized pieces of paper, usually rectangular. It doesn't work with papyrus, so it had to wait until parchment became mass-produced from around 400 BCE, peaking around the age of Jesus, shooting into household object fame after Gutenberg, globalized in the 20th century, and perhaps doomed to death in the 21st century. But we do want to keep in mind that books preceded the codex by almost 2 millennia. The earliest book we have, or at least the claim for the earliest book, is the Egyptian Book of the Dead of 1800 BCE. It was a kind of a how-to manual, the very first book of what to do when you descend into the Netherlands. Books are then set to outlive the codex too, perhaps by more than 2 millennia. But note that most prime ministers I know, most presidents I know, when giving a televised address to the nation, sit at their desks or firesides against a backdrop of codices, normally leather-bound hardback, rather than posing in front of a desk load of electronic readers. Incidental lesson number 1, electronic books, both software and hardware, are not as photogenic as codices. The movie industry has already found that out. Heads of state posing to the nation know about it too. Now let's go over the nostalgic aspect first. I respect it a lot. The codex has a powerful nostalgic aspect. We owe a lot to it. When the codex finally disappears in favor of a truly comfortable ebook, even the cuddly kind of ebook we can only dream about now, our senses of sight and touch may lose some and win plenty, but our sense of smell is bound to lose. Smell is a great proponent of nostalgia. I will miss the scent of old leather folios. I think I'll also miss the scent of new cheap paperbacks. We will also gradually lose the presence of the codex-type books as object in our world. If you want to boast about your big library, you need a shelf of codices. An iPad doesn't give away the number of books that it holds. Consider the issue of weight and presence in space. There is a book by E.M. Forster, some of you might have read, called Howard's End, 1910. And at the end of Howard's End, you might remember that poor Leonard Bast, that's the name of the hero, an intellectually ambitious lower middle-class clerk, is literally killed by books, by the books he loves so much, when a bookshelf collapses upon him and crushes him. Now, people could easily get killed in ancient times if, for example, an inscribed stone tablet from Assyria or an ancient or from ancient Rome fell on their heads. No question about that. It would be rather more difficult to get smashed under a room full of rolled up scrolls, and you will need to be very, very unlucky to get killed by a Kindle, even if it contains 10 times more books than E.M. Forster's lethal library. So codices have a presence. They have weight in the world. Prior to codices, or maybe first, incidental lesson number 2, if codices disappear, the codex library will disappear too from everyday life, both the public library with its hushed expanses and the home library with its social significance and bourgeois pretensions. Already screens rather than bound volumes line our living rooms, but the screens in our living rooms are not about books, even if they happen to contain books. Now, prior to codices and running along with them for a few centuries, like Neanderthals ran along with Homo sapiens, were tablets and scrolls. Tablets could be stone or wood, mainly the stone survives. Scrolls, as we said, could be papyrus or parchment, and only the luckiest papyri actually survived. In the Middle Ages and in the Disney movies, the scrolls you see are parchment scrolls. Why did the codex win the day? Sometime between the 4th century before Common Era and the 1st century after Common Era around the Mediterranean. For 3 main reasons. Good transportability, easy accessibility, and that lovely finger-friendly flippability of its pages. We all know that. You can't put bookmarks into ancient tablets or scrolls. When the codex came along, the human fingers became the first bookmarks in the history of readings. There's another reason some scholars mention for the rise of the codex, and that is, believe it or not, that it didn't look Jewish. Early Christians were happy to have their sacred books in a form totally different from those scrolls in the synagogues. It took the codex a few centuries until people stopped looking at a bound Hebrew Bible and saying, "Funny, you don't look Jewish." By the late Middle Ages, it certainly did. So Judaism took over the codex as well. Now, all the other revolutions, the colorful illuminated volume of the Benedictines, the printing press of Gutenberg, the paperback of Penguin books, are ensconced within the history of the codex until now. Until the roll down electronic text of the computer screen and the click flip turning page of the electronic reader. Until the e-scroll and the e-tablet. Let us consider briefly what pre-codexed tablets and scrolls had in common with post-codex tablets and scrolls. That is, where they might be grouped together vis-a-vis the codex. Think about ancient tablets, very heavy, writ in rock. Modern tablets, light, thin, words slipping through keyboard. The 2 meanings of writ in rock, difficult to engrave, therefore must be a very wise person to do that, also a very wealthy person to do that, and remaining forever. Both meanings seem to go under in the case of electronic tablets. This is not forever, you don't have to say very wise things, it's not so difficult to engrave. But is that really the case? Won't words remain better guarded on future clouds than they have been in the past upon stone or rock? And didn't we find out that certain tweets once sent are somewhat writ in stone and cause their hapless tweeters endless misery for being unable to untweet them? Now, think about Moses. The 10 Commandments, tabernacles. Where is my Moses? Here is my Moses. Let him come up. Can't open the page. Okay, so I'd like you to imagine, well, I've got this at least. I would like you to imagine Charleston Heston as Moses holding 2 of these in his hands. two of these, okay? Two identical Kindles. We can even design the Kindles the way it was merely imagined by a Middle Ages artist to have this McDonald-like rounded top. So you know the McDonald emblem, two Kindles, okay? First day, Kindle 1, he smashes on the mountainside in despair when seeing the golden calf. Now, the golden calf in our imagination can, of course, be represented by an Xbox console, complete with a Kinect, enabling the children of Israel, like my own children, to dance around it in style. On the second round, if you recall, Moses is back with what I used to call the second edition of the Ten Commandments, but now we can simply call them Kindle 2. Now, these tablets are far lighter than the stone tablets of Moses. They pride themselves in their lightweight, whereas the original stones were pointedly heavy, dramatically held up by the muscular Moses or Charleston Heston, magnificently smashed against the rock, and on take 2, solidly preserved, carried around in the Ark of the Covenant, and kept in the Shiloh sanctuary, then in the Jerusalem temple, for centuries to come. A modern tablet would not enjoy the aura of timelessness and the respectability of century-long preservation. It would make way for a new generation. It is not likely to keep living as a sacred object, or if you like, a spiritual fetish for generation. I cannot imagine a rabbi or a preacher who would kiss a Kindle before reverently returning it into its decorated enclosure. But who knows, that might come. Nor are we likely to ever have the excitement of discovering a latter-day Rosetta Stone or Dead Sea Scrolls. Neither digital texts nor their physical carriers are likely to be lost or found in that way. Still, you are welcome to imagine a little science fiction, a future global catastrophe with a small bunch of survivors unearthing an iPad with its battery 97% full, and on that iPad, let's imagine they find the whole existing 4 seasons of Mad Men and Jonathan Franzen's latest novel. A new religion will be born. A final point about the problematic physique of the modern tablet. Of course, the 10 commandments would not look half as good in horizontal mode. I'm getting near, hopefully, the end of my presentation. What I'm trying to, 5 minutes is plenty. What I'm trying to say then is that ancient tablets, scrolls, and books are one text objects. Their physical bilaterality associated with their contents in a way that the electronic reader isn't. So an iPad or a Kindle is also an object, but not a rose of one color, not a one-trick pony, not a carrier of one text. So we cannot have the future equivalents of the Hammurabi tablets, the Rosetta Stone, the illuminated manuscript, Les Très Riches Heures de Jean-Duc de Berry, Gutenberg's Bible, and so on and so forth. E-book hardware is never first, never singular, never smells of dust and new, never chewed by moth. You can never see it in the British Library and say, old Johannes held this in his hand. Incidental lesson number 3, we shall only have 4, we will need gradually to de-fetishize our love of historical books. If somebody accidentally blows up the British Library, it would be bad but not as horrid as the burning down of the Alexandria Library in the 1st century BCE. The books will survive, their earliest containers will, alas, perish. So it's not the physicality that's disappearing, it's the bilaterality of container and content. Scrolling, I'm going to cut short a little bit, but I need to mention Jane Austen. I simply do. Do you remember that lovely codex, Northanger Abbey, by Jane Austen? Towards the end of the book, she writes playfully, and I quote her, "My readers will see in the telltale compression of the pages before them that we are all hastening together toward a perfect felicity." Meaning, since you are getting to the end of the book, you already know that the happy end is coming. Now, of course, the e-book will have an equivalent to this telltale compression of the pages. It has the scroll cursor to show you where you are in the book. But have you thought of the opposite possibility, something that an ebook can do and Jane Austen cannot. An ebook can deliberately deprive its readers of the knowledge whether or not they are nearing the end. Eliminate the scroll cursor, that's all you have to do, and then you give Jane Austen a poetic choice she never had, like movies, like The Sopranos, like life itself. Your novel can screech to a halt without giving you the chance to see the end coming. It could change the way books are written, or at least the way endings are done. I call upon ebook hardware designer to give authors the privilege of choosing whether their book will have a scrolling cursor or not. Or perhaps the readers may choose. Drop down menu options, add or block that telltale cursor. Now suppose we wish to read Dostoevsky's great novel, The Idiot, in Russian, idiot, in Russian without the, but in English translation it is The Idiot. And I will quickly skip to my point about the idiot, or the idiot when you read it on an iDigital ebook. Those of you who love 19th century Russian novels know that every Russian novel worth its salt has 837 pages, give or take a couple, okay? Now, in every Russian novel, at around page 649, into the room rush Ivan Andreevich and Yelizaveta Grigorievna, and they are very, very excited and also very important for the plot, and you have no clue who these people are, because they only appeared on page 212 before that. Search, search, search. Dostoevsky would never have thought about that. I do it all the time. Incidental lesson number 4, ebooks are useful with Russian novels. I'm really getting near my end. I have several very tempting other suggestions of what ebooks can do for authorial poetics of both the novelist and the poet. I will have to skip some of them, but I think some of them are absolutely wonderful. But I will skip them. Well, only one really. You know, this new reader behavior algorithm, the way I click, the way I turn my pages on the ebook, can tell the ebook how excited I am about the plot, whether I'm in suspense, whether I'm worried, whether I'm bored. Imagine a John Grisham creating levels of suspense in the plot adjustable to the individual input of each reader's fingers. And we can choose whether we want him to make us even more scared or maybe slightly less scared by the feeling of our finger input. But finally, and really finally this time, let's use the ancient tables and scrolls to remind us of the numerous, amazing, and joyful advantages of their digital descendants. In order to commission a stone tablet, you had to be a Mesopotamian king or a Roman lawmaker. In order to write a scroll, you had to be a professional scribe. Papyrus was very difficult to handle. Parchment, by the way, even more so. Codices were tremendously expensive to begin with, hugely costly to reproduce in the age of the manuscript, still very pricey in the era of incunabula, the first printed books, and only very gradually becoming less costly, less expensive, and truly affordable when the paperback came along. We owe this credit to the Codex, and we should love the Codex for this. It was a vessel of ever-ascending accessibility. It multiplied itself dramatically, and we owe the digital age to writers and readers of codices. I have omitted most economic aspects from my presentation, considering the cultural and aesthetic features of book objects instead. But let me end not just by congratulating the Codex, but by hailing the era of ebooks and saying this: if mankind does not destroy somehow either its resources or its technology or its globalizing literacy or its plethora of creative talents, then the digital age can guarantee that books, while never quite wholly again, will never be expensive again either. Thank you very much.
Good morning. My name is Ruth Okediji, and it is my delight to chair this first panel of the day. And let me just say thank you to Panya for that wonderful and really illuminating and stirring talk. I am a lover of books, and I have never read an ebook out of sheer rebellion. This first presentation perhaps will make me mourn for the past and be able to embrace the future. So thank you very much for that. I think that one of the things that our panel today will be focusing on, and we'll see if our speakers have a common theme, but in reflecting on our first talk of the morning, the assumption, I think, as copyright scholars has been that when the author writes, readers are simply passive recipients. Perhaps we have become constrained by our own visions of copyright as it has been in the last decade and a half, and not as it might be for authors and readers. So our panel will be focusing on limits to access to digital works, and of course, I'm sure we will hear about control, authorial privilege, and hopefully user domain issues. So I'm going to introduce Professor Kenny Cruz, who is our first speaker. He is the director of the Copyright Advisory Office at Columbia University Libraries. He's a dear friend to many of us, the author of the WIPO study on limitations for libraries, and he will be starting us off this morning. Kenny?
Thank you. And then just use the arrow keys to move forward and backwards. Good. Good. Thank you. Is it up there? How are we doing? Thank you very much. Thank you, Ruth. Thank you for that nice introduction. Thanks to all of you. Thank you, Nina, Lily. Is Lily in the room? Lily, she's somewhere. Be sure to give thanks to Nina and Lily for all that they've done to really make this possible. And thanks to everybody here at the university. And thank you to the technology people for helping us in moments of need. Thank you. Wonderful to be here. It's a delight to be here visiting in Israel. It's a beautiful country. I can extend many compliments to you. It's also a place where discussion about international, multinational issues is appropriate. We can see it everywhere we go. For those of us who were sharing a cab this morning coming in from the hotel, we had a distinctly multinational experience. An Israeli cab, signs in Hebrew and Arabic. We were listening to American music, sometimes with a Welsh singer. We had a driver who insisted he was from China. He did that to me, but he made his jokes and wisecracks in English, but his driving, we all agreed, was distinctly Italian. So we had the full experience. We had the full experience coming in today. Very happy to be here. And so my subject will be focusing on the context of copyright law and the forces that bear on the development of eBooks and other digital resources in the context of international, multinational copyright law. Keep your eye on the little tadpole up there. He may show up again. Because some of the things that we've heard to get us started, some of the things we heard yesterday, for example, it was Neva who told us about the diversity of stakeholders and interests. We heard about the disintermediation of publishers, the whole changing nature of the book industry. We heard from Oliver about the access and use being constrained by law. We heard from Paul about the goal, a central goal, and there are many other goals, being eternal and universal access, and that all of this is taking place in a context, as we well know, of changing technology. So let me introduce a little bit about the law in which all of these events are occurring. And we can look at international copyright law in many ways. There are elements of it that are border control. In addition to the usual import-export laws that may exist and certainly exist in every country in one form or another, there are import-export restrictions in copyright law as well. Restrictions about bringing in works and trans-border data flow, about first sale, a little bit we heard about yesterday, and the sale of works. There have been in the past, I can't think of a current example, maybe you can, about manufacturing requirements being in the law, that copyrighted works must be made in certain countries in order to have copyright validity. So there's a certain element of border control. But the main aspect that I want to focus on is really the substantive elements about rights of owners and rights of users that you will find and that dominate much of copyright law. Copyright law, even though we're talking about an international context, the law itself is fundamentally domestic law. The international context sets the requirements and the framework, but what is really law and what is really binding is determined by domestic standards. And so it's within that context that countries have a certain amount of discretion, particularly with respect to the so-called limitations and exceptions. And so the most famous of those, of course, is fair use. Famous here in Israel as well as in the United States, and very important in many ways, and that'll be the focus of much of what I'll be talking about in just the next several minutes. But we need to bear in mind that there are many different statutory limitations and exceptions, and they are highly diverse. They're diverse in many ways. Not all countries have addressed the same issues, and few countries have addressed the same issues in the same way, although some patterns certainly do exist. So the challenge in a law context that's relevant to the ability to use, to innovate from, to build from eBooks and other digital resources really in large part depends upon those limitations and exceptions to the rights of owners. Well, the Berne Convention, multinational treaty, 164 countries are members of this treaty. The Berne Convention includes a so-called three-step test. More about that coming up on the next slide or so. It's reinforced by TRIPS, TRIPS being a more binding agreement that is part of the World Trade Organization. But I would hasten to add that the ability to use the three-step test has in many ways been limited or constrained by the European Union Directive of 2001, which includes a finite list of exceptions and limitations, thus making it difficult for the international system to break beyond the boundaries of that finite list. And so in a context where there's flexibility about the development of limitations and exceptions, we also see a number of different reasons why there is limited capacity within a country, within the international system, to really build a robust set of exceptions. There are circumstances like all law, circumstances of politics, economics, history, culture, the list could go on. There are issues about choice of law. When we have an international transaction, a work goes from country A to country B, whose law applies, whose exceptions and limitations apply. When I clip and post that work to a website, but it's transmitted out worldwide, whose law applies? And then there's always the hovering threat of a challenge in the WTO, in the World Trade Organization, where a country can enact an exception, but it's subject to being reviewed upon challenge by the WTO as to whether it complies with that three-step test. And here's the three-step test. That this is the language straight from the Berne Convention. It shall be a matter for legislation. Now that's code word for a country has a choice It shall be a matter for legislation. Country, you decide. It shall be a matter for legislation in the countries of this union, the 164 countries, to permit reproduction of works, only reproduction, and then here are the 3 steps. That if we're going to have a statute that says we may have fair use, or we're going to have a statute that says you can digitize that work for educational purposes, etc., well, that's permissible if that statute applies only in certain special cases where the uses do not conflict with a normal exploitation of the work and do not unreasonably prejudice the legitimate interests of the author. Well, there are important differences, but still very similar language that shows up over in the WTO TRIPS agreement. 3 steps that we judge these laws. Well, this is a challenge because this is not gracefully outlined. These are really rough steps. We're not really sure what they mean. We have very little guidance about them substantively. They're a little bit on edge, and you just might fall off if you don't step carefully. So the ability, again, to build robust set of statutory copyright exceptions is difficult, to say the least, which really takes me to fair use. Because fair use is so different from the statutory exceptions that exist in American law, exist in Israeli law, exist in the laws of most countries, in that it's not specific. So it's built upon 4 factors. Those 4 factors summarized here: the purpose, nature, amount, and effect. I'll outline them on the next slide. But what's really important about fair use is its flexibility, its versatility. It brings flexibility to this law, it compensates for those limits in the law, and it's adaptable to changing needs and circumstances. What is fair use? Fair use is the purpose of the use, the nature of the work that you're using, the amount and substantiality, and the effect on the market. It's learning what those words mean. Again, maybe it's like a rough 3 steps, but it's 4 steps. And it's balancing them in the context of a given situation and determining then, resolving then, what is or is not fair, for lack of a better word. So why a rock and roll poster? Well, we'll come back to that too, along with our tadpole friend. So where did fair use come from? We can trace it back 150 or more years in some case law development, but it was articulated in the statute, the Copyright Revision Act in the United States of 1976. Ford signed that. Who was Ford? Yeah, that one. President Ford signed it into law in 1976. And the Copyright Revision Act included the Fair Use Statute. But its fair use in its real meaning is not just a half page that lists those 4 factors. Fair use in its real meaning is what courts have said those factors mean. So we need to go to the judicial decisions. And let me just single out 2 of them because they happen to be about books. One of them is the Kinko's case from 1991, which involved the question of photocopying by Kinko's. Kinko's is a major, now part of the FedEx Corporation, but Kinko's was an extensive, in the United States, nationwide, now it's worldwide, nationwide string of copy shops, commercial for-profit entities that were found to be photocopying book chapters and putting them together into a stack of copies at the request of faculty members at a university, Columbia, and selling them to students over the counter. And the question before the court was, is that fair use? And in 1991, the court said no. And we could go through the analysis, but one of the main aspects of the analysis is that it's a commercial use, and that these were portions of works that were really, the court perceived, cutting into the sales of these particular works. But it's much more complex and much more subtle. But in 1991, many of the court decisions about fair use were largely just kind of a lockstep approach. But over the years, the law of fair use has really changed and has become much more flexible. And it's become much more flexible in large part because of an important decision from the U.S. Supreme Court in 1994. So looking at a more recent example involving books, here's a rock and roll poster. Here's a big coffee table size book about the history of the Grateful Dead rock band. Are we all deadheads? Don't have to admit it. But it included some images of these rock and roll posters from the 60s, and here came the lawsuit. Those are my copyrighted works, I'm suing you. And what did the court say? Went back to these 4 factors and said, you know, even though the publisher is commercial, we're going to see that more flexibly. And we're going to see that, yeah, it's commercial, but it's also providing for the needs of readers to have access to scholarly historical information. The nature of the work, normally the courts are very protective under fair use about artistic works. But the court said, no, it's not only artistic. These are emblems of the historical era. They're part of telling the story of the history of music. So that makes them really critical for the use in this context. Amount, it wasn't just words and percentages, these are images. And so the court measured amount very differently and said these are smaller size, they're lower resolutions. Remember yesterday somebody raised the point about eBooks have embedded content. And here's a context of embedded content where it can be fair use. And that further, in terms of market harm or market effect, the court actually turned that one around and said, you know what, the use on the work, the use of those images in the book may actually help the market for the sale of posters and other reproductions of that same rock and roll image. So the court, in a more recent case, is looking at the factors of fair use much more flexibly and in a way that much better accommodates the diverse way that we are using and creating new works. But let me take a different tack on it. You know, not everybody likes to deal with fair use. Not everybody's comfortable with what it means or how to apply it or how to work with the bit of uncertainty that's part of fair use. So what's also happened is that there's been a movement to say not everything needs the same protection. One thing that the international system is really good at is protecting works, securely, automatically, granting a lot of rights and granting those rights for a long period of years. But it's not very good at creating exceptions. And so there's been a movement through open access movement, open access publication, requirements by universities and funding agencies to make content open so that we use the rights of being creators and owners to say we don't necessarily need all the rights and to push this content out for the public to use. And in addition to open access, one of the very important developments in this area is Creative Commons, so that new works can exist, new works can be shared, and that as the user, you don't necessarily need to even grapple with fair use. Even if it's an easy fair use situation, you don't need to if it is a Creative Commons licensed kind of work. And so there's our tadpole again, sort of at the early stages of becoming something. And we're always at the early stages of the next development in fair use, in limitations, exceptions, in international law. And some of the developments that are happening around us right now in this arena is Google Books, the development of the massive library of Google Books, the decision from the court. We'll all have to watch and see what may come next. Orphan works, resolving some of the problems there, and that issue has been stirred up again for many reasons, needs to be addressed. Very few countries have tackled it. No solution is yet looking very attractive, but it's something that we need to deal with in order to free up material in this environment for easier use. The case against pending right now, in fact, in trial this week against Georgia State University, involving the question of scanning of